Shalom TV's coverage of the 10th anniversary Limmud conference is made possible in part by a grant from Dr. Naomi Vilko, in honor of her mother, Olga Vilko, and in memory of her father, William Vilko.
We live in a time that's radically different from the times of our ancestors. Modernity and postmodernity is all about choice, radical choice. If I could use the words of Peter Berger, we are all heretics. That is, we have all chosen to be Jews. Whether or not we were born of Jewish parents or we have come into the Jewish community, we are all, in today's culture, Jews by choice. And not only that, we choose what Judaism we live. Again, unlike our ancestors, at least our ancestors beyond 200 years ago, we have a whole smorgasbord of opportunities and possibilities and interpretations of the Judaism we choose to live. And that's what we're going to talk about today in the panel. Do we understand Judaism and Jewish life in the traditional way, which essentially was a system of commandments dropped from Shemayim that impose obligations upon us? That's the traditional understanding of Judaism and the life of the Jew. Or do we understand Judaism as a more generic expression of the Jewish people? Not necessarily normative, but just this is who we are. Or do we understand Judaism as a system that tries to shape a community, or a system that allows us for maximal individual personal expression? Do we understand Judaism to be just another variety of ethnicity? Or do we understand Judaism to be a system that pushes us to moral perfection? And what is the advantage of this rather strange and very small in terms of the totality of human culture? What advantage does Judaism have, over other options, be it Buddhism or Christianity or nonism? The fastest form of religion in America today are the nuns, the L-O-N-O-N-E-S. The nuns, those people who opt not to identify with any religion. So if we opt to identify with Judaism, why? And there's no one generic philosophical answer. I think this is a deeply personal question and a deeply personal answer.
Hi. So I'd like to begin by problematizing, asking some questions about one of the questions, as is the way of our people. Why is Judaism a better buy at the great spiritual shuk than other religions? I think is a very problematic question because, listen, I'm a Jew. I was raised as a Jew. I have invested my time and love and work and practice and learning in this tradition. And even as someone with a degree in comparative literature who has flirted around with other faith traditions extensively, I'm so rooted in this perspective, and to assume that I have anything intelligent or profound to say about what it's like deep, deep, deep in the well of Hinduism or Christianity, I think belies the fact of my rootedness in a particular location. So I would like to say that I refuse to have an opinion about why Judaism. And really, with the information that I have, I do believe that they're all rivers that get us to the same great ocean. So the question is not, why is Judaism the best religion possibly available at the great international shuk? But why would a Jew choose Judaism, choose to invest their love and heart and work and practice here? I think that's a much more interesting question. In my experience, the Jews who have gone off and explored other faith traditions, and I'm not going to speak about conversion here because it's a profound and important process, and we only have so much time, and there's a sense of mystery about that process that I don't want to open up right now. But for people who were born and raised Jewishly, whether that's red diaper babies or secular atheist skeptics or people who have been through the bar mitzvah factory farm or what have you, my experience is that people go elsewhere because they don't know that they're standing next to a door. They don't know that the door opens. They don't know that they can walk into the room and that there is this room filled with exquisite, exquisite treasures and that they can have as much as they want. And that, with the right engagement and empowerment, they can learn that they don't have to have it all. They can have what they want. They can take this piece and break it and connect it to something else and build it and become part of the story of people bringing our Torah forward into the next generation, whatever that looks like. And the longing that I see of Jews who, my pagan friends who still need to celebrate Passover because it's who they are, or stories after stories, there's that moment for many, many, many Jews when they finally get into the room and say, oh, I had no idea, nobody told me. Right? What is this all doing here? Right? I learned how to say the words to pray to the sky god when I was 13, but that's not actually what it is to live inside Jewish practice. And it's not what it's like to have a nuanced, complex Jewish life. And the problem is that people often get led up to the door and then somebody walks away. And my experience as an educator is that the minute you get somebody into that room, if they have any sort of Jewish identity, and I include, I have students this kid who's basically Sri Lankan American who discovers that his mother's mother was Jewish, right? So halachically he's Jewish, he's not part of his faith, but there's some connection to this peoplehood. The minute you get somebody into this room, it's dazzling, and they say, oh, there is a sense of wholeness and completeness that is available to me here. Norman Fisher, who is a great teacher in Zen Buddhism, was very good friends with Alan Liu, who's his memory be for blessing, a great rabbi who also spent 20 years in Zen. Alan said that he meditated down, after 20 years, he meditated down to his spiritual essence and realized he was a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. Went to his rabbi and said, listen, I sit meditation, in the morning and in the evening. Does Judaism have anything like that? Yes. So Alan went off to rabbinical school. Norman went to go visit him, his buddy from the Zen days, and Norman put on tefillin for the first time. He'd been raised fairly firm, put on tefillin for the first time after years and years and years of meditation, and said, if I had not gone so deep into Zen, I never would have understood what this is, right? So how can we, and so my question is less, why choose Judaism, than how can we, as people who are invested in the Jewish conversation and in the tradition, get people into the room? How can we show them around and explain to them what all of these exquisite gifts are? And to say, this is yours. this is, you can own this, and you don't have to even use this thing the way I use it. But first you have to learn about it so that you can understand what it is, and then, go have at it. So I'm much more interested in the question of how can we get people into the place where they, starting point is non-sucky Jewish experiences, which, frankly, American Judaism still has a ways to go in many quarters of the Jewish world, right? But then, the place where they can at least glimpse the alchemy and the magic and decide for themselves how far into the room they want to go and what they want to do when they're there. So, thank you.
So, I begin with the assumption that one of the biggest turnoffs for me whenever I'm in a religious conversation, when a speaker, a rabbi, a writer reflexively feels the need to say, this is what makes Judaism unique. Inevitably, it makes me wonder, is that true? And often in my studies, when a writer will say, what makes Judaism unique is the focus on X. In contradistinction to Buddhism, which focuses on nothingness, Judaism is all about X, Y, and Z, and I'll think to myself, I wonder if this person has ever opened up a book on Buddhism. And I think, or Judaism, exactly. So I just want to begin with a basic, for me, what is intellectually rigorous, intellectually has integrity, is to admit that more often than not, when Judaism has spoken about other traditions, it generally didn't really know enough about the variety, the variegated beauty of other traditions, just as most writers who spoke about Judaism didn't know the fullness of the tradition either. And it would be more accurate when we speak about other traditions, as is the case, I think, when we speak about Judaism. The truism that there are Judaisms is the case. And there are there are Buddhisms and Christianities and Islams and so on. And that opens the door in a postmodernity to a kind of, again, a hermeneutic of suspicion about the particular narrative that we have about other traditions and the relationship between Judaism and other traditions. It opens us up to a kind of deep ecumenism, which I think is very vital for the 20th and the 21st century, that what was called perennial wisdom, a core teaching about life that was shared across the board amongst other traditions, is a vital component of a spirituality for the 21st century. That deep ecumenism and a respect for the core elements that we share. My teacher, Reb Zalman Shalomi, should live and be well, has often said that when he once went to a monastery to sit with Christian monks, he was told about a place that it was a good place to go on a retreat, and he calls himself a peeping Tom for God. He likes to see how other people get it on with God. And so he went to this monastery, and immediately some of the monks wanted to engage him in a theological conversation about the Trinity. You can imagine what they wanted to talk about. And he said, something, let's open up the Psalms, and let's say Psalms together. And instead of engaging in a debate about theology, let us engage in a dialogue of devotion. A dialogue of devotion. And it is possible. It is possible to engage in such a dialogue. That's kind of one thing that I wanted to begin by saying, is that I have personally been engaged and enriched by many, many traditions that I imagined when I was an ultra-Orthodox Jew that I would never, ever entertain. From dancing with Sufis, to sitting and listening to Father Thomas Keating speaking about centering prayer in Colorado, to my explorations of Zen Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism and other traditions. So I really want to be modeh. I want to thank them for what they gave me. They gave me a way of speaking about Judaism that, as Danya said very, very beautifully, that I couldn't have spoken about before. I want to say that we suffer from a kind of post-traumatic God disorder in our tradition. And there is a kind of God disorder or a relationship with the theology of the traditional theology, which makes it very difficult for people to enter into. And that we have, in many ways, to be thankful and grateful for a new lexicon that has been given us in the conversation with the East. Just as the Rambam found in his conversation with Aristotle a way of understanding Judaism in a new way, there has been a renaissance of understanding Jewish mysticism and Jewish experience through the engagement with Buddhism in particular and in general with the East. When people come to me as a pulpit rabbi, and I get this a lot because people hear that Romamu and the community that I started is very into Jewish mysticism, and we get a lot of travelers, a lot of seekers who come to sit with me. And almost inevitably, they say to me, why should I choose Judaism? Right? I'm very happy with my Zen, I'm very happy with my yoga, I'm very happy with all of these different things. And very much along the lines of what Dani was saying, I essentially say something that recently I was told that David Hartman used to say this too, Alav HaShalom. He used to say, it's about mishpacha. He called it mishpachtology. Is that true? Mishpachtology? I don't have a good reason. In other words, if you want me to make a truth claim and say that Judaism is truer than other traditions, I won't be able to convince you. There is beauty, there is uniqueness, and I'm sure Reb Shai and Asher will speak about the particulars of what is unique about the Jewish instrument in the symphony of spirit. But there is no good reason, meaning this system in some ways is as good and also as weak, as vulnerable as other traditions. I don't make an absolute claim on Judaism's truth per se, but I say that it is as subject to it is as weak, it is as indefensible as the other traditions. There is no other place that you will go which will not have the same issues. They'll have different beauties, but often the similar issues. So when I speak with them, I say, well, if you're already Jewish, like Danya said, why not explore the power of this tradition? This tradition is as powerful as any other tradition. It has its own unique features. And not only that, I will make a claim and say that every tradition is a vital organ in the organism of the planet. Every tradition needs to be strong. It needs to be cleansed and purged of certain things that are no longer relevant. And your role as a participant in this tradition is vital. So why not pull up a seat and enter into this conversation? That's what I will say to them. And if that is compelling, then I hope that they'll participate. So I'm kind of looking forward to what will be shared. And I think the last thing I will say is that the best have to is want to. That the only way for a vital, compelling Jewish narrative to move forward is for it to be vital and compelling. It is for it to engage in a courageous way with all of the various issues that have arisen and to be shaped and formed as well as to shape and to form. And to the extent that we are part of the larger conversation in this country about the complexity of identity, I think that the hyphenate itself is something to be celebrated. I love that there are Jubus and Hujus and Sufi Jews and Renui Jews and Bai Jews and queer Jews. I love what is happening to this Jewish identity as it's engaging in the quote-unquote marketplace of spiritual ideas here in the United States.
I want to just maybe share a few observations that are totally unsystematic. The first is just sort of a thought about the why questions, like the why be Jewish question that seems to preoccupy Jewish philanthropists. And the truth is, I find that question to be basically on some level a parallel to the question of why believe in God. And once I think about that, I realize something very important, which is there really are, in the 20th century and probably going back much further, two different ways of doing theology. One way is what philosophers call apologetic theology, and you should bracket anything the word apologetic suggests to you, because it's not what it means. Apologetic theology is essentially the process of saying, I believe something, I want you to believe it too, I'm now going to offer a series of arguments whereby I will convince you that if you're rational, you should believe that too. One of the things I would suggest is that apologetic theology has been convincing to very few people ever who have not already been convinced before the conversation began, right? No, that's true. Religiously, one of the things in the Middle Ages, the arguments for the existence of God did was bolster the faith of those who already believed. The other form of theology is called confessional theology. And that's what I want to talk about for a minute. Confessional theology is essentially the process of saying, here's what I believe. If you were to wear my glasses, here's what the world would look like. If these glasses seem compelling to you, you're welcome to them. And if they don't, much as I might wish I could convince you, I don't actually have a way of doing that. All I can do is show, describe, invite, and then get out of the way. By the way, ironically, the most compelling 20th century articulation of confessional theology is the beginning of Rabbi Joseph Soloveitchik's book, The Lonely Man of Faith, in which I think he is not being coy when he says, here's a picture. I can't argue you into this. We're not at that stage in the history of philosophy. I'm going to convince you of the truth of this. I'm going to offer it to you. And I say that because I actually feel like the why questions, to me, are a tiny bit crazy-making. I had this battle a couple of years ago with a rabbi of a congregation who said to me, I want you to come to my shul. I'm so impressed with Machon Hadar. I want you to come to my shul and talk to us about why we should learn Torah. I said, I'm not interested in that. I'll come to your shul and we'll learn Torah. No, but we want to know why we should do it. I said, I know, you'll decide if you want to do it if you do it, right? So the compromise was, I gave a shiur about sources about why we should learn Torah, right? But the point is, but I think that there is something actually there's something very important there about not going overly meta. Because very few people's hearts are shifted, their existential commitments altered by meta conversations. Why this? It's actually no, try this on, right? Whatever that might mean. The second thought I wanted to share is that really just a cultural observation. We live in a moment that is extremely fascinating, and it has so overtaken us that very few people ever stand outside it to look at it. The fact that the conversation, when we were preparing for this session, one of the questions that went around was, how is Judaism different from Buddhism? What does it offer that Buddhism doesn't? And I found myself so fascinated by that because on the level of metaphysics, a much more interesting question would be, how does Judaism differ from Christianity or Islam? Why shouldn't I be Christian or Muslim? In fact, historically, that's the question Jews thought about and Jews were bludgeoned into thinking about, right? And there's just something fascinating about how culturally located we are, and we become so deeply culturally located that we don't actually reflect on our cultural location. I mean, think about this. If you walked into an American synagogue and said, listen, I want to become serious about my Judaism by meditating on Christ, you would get chased out of the building. But if you said, I want to meditate on my Judaism by having, a Buju convention, they would say, maybe the Federation will give you a grant, right? Now, but I think what's interesting about that, right, at the risk of saying something that is totally obvious, part of that draw is that many American Jews are specifically searching for a path that is not about God, which is why the abandonment of traditional Jewish theology comes with a disinterest in Christianity and Islam, right? So, okay, so that's one obvious piece. And also, of course, as I said, right, Buddhists did not spend their time bludgeoning Jews into considering the Buddha as a path, right? And that makes it a little safer, right? You don't have the same agmat nefesh, the same inner torture about, I'm going to read Thomas Merton in shul, right? Which I'm not opposed to. I'm just saying, I think it's actually, there's a deep kind of historical piece there. Now, you can see this as good or bad. I want to sort of bracket a value judgment about this. You can see this as good or bad, but one of the things that has happened as a result of some of the theologies of Jewish renewal and Neo-Hasidism is that they are actually the ones who have made possible this question. And again, you can see this as a positive thing or a negative thing. That is to say, right, what many traditional Jewish thinkers would have said is, I don't understand. One of these paths is about the worship of a transcendent creator who has a will and stands over above us. And the other one is about something radically different. And yet once parts of Jewish renewal and Neo-Hasidism began to talk about things like non-duality, pantheism, whatever it might be, all of a sudden, the Buddhist conversation became much more plausible. It began to make much more sense for people. I'm happy to talk later about my value judgments about that, but I'm actually trying to observe something about the culture that I think is interesting and worth reflecting on. The other thing is that I just find interesting here, just to speak personally for one moment, is the ways in which exoticization has a big piece in our spiritual life in ways that we're not aware of. So here's a totally embarrassing thing I would like to share. A few months ago, I was sitting on my computer in the morning, and I was reading an article about a Buddhist monk in Myanmar, I think it is, who proudly calls himself the Buddhist Osama bin Laden and calls on his monks to aggressively attack Muslims when they see them. And so my first reaction was to be appalled. And my second reaction was, yes, thank God, Buddhists are in fact not perfect. And I found myself really embarrassed. I was like, not every Buddhist is Thich Nhat Hanh. That's amazing, right? They're actually human beings like Jews are. And I think there's something about that that's worth reflecting, because it's very easy. I think all of the criticisms of American Judaism that American Jews levy, a very large percentage of those are justified, right? But some of them are about a loss of patience with that which is your own, right? The person you're not married to is always, I don't want to finish this sentence because I want to go home later, but no, I mean, there's something that's very important there about that, and I think actually what kind of maturing evolution of the conversation about Judaism and Buddhism, and David began to allude to this, I think, will actually take stock of the ways that, yes, right, human beings have had a major role in shaping both of these traditions, and there is a lot to say about the ways they can both grow in conversation with each other. I'll stop there and say more later.
Rabbi Danya mentioned something very, very beautiful that just resonated with me, and that is this sense of ownership that Jews have of their tradition. And frankly, it's true that other peoples will have that sense of ownership also of their religion. It's part of our theology, and not only part of our theology, but I think that the effort we have to make, and we are the involved Jews, Jews that are interested, Jews that come to Limmud, is to make sure exactly to open that store, that bookshop, to make sure that we are creating the kind of communities that let people know, let Jews know that they are owners of the Torah just like we are. And the truth is, you know, we talk about we'd love for them to be part of it, but, you know, is there this sense, are we open to having everyone being an owner? And once everyone is an owner, every Jew is an owner, they're going to come up with new ideas, with challenging ideas, with difficult ideas that we're going to have to argue with. Are we open to that? And I think that that's maybe even more of the question about this thirst for spirituality and how we're going to shift some of that to us. And I actually want to, Rav Zalman Schachter Shalomi was mentioned beautifully by Rav David, and I went to an Ohala conference with David and met him there for the first time, and just a few 1 minute sitting down with him is transformative, and I got to actually Skype him a little bit, and I actually really want Chovei Torah to have a lot more to do with his teachings. But I was able to, I had read about one of his ideas, and I was able to, when I saw him, speak to him about that idea. And a lot of times I do this. I read about someone and I'll sit down with him and say, did you really say this? So he actually really said this. And it concerns the Aleinu. And I think it gives a good paradigm for this sense of openness, but at the same time, a sense of passion about our religion. If we're totally open, if we're opening up this store, is there passion in the store? The Aleinu, the traditional, some Sidurim say the tribal version of Aleinu, talks about Shalo samchal kenukem v'gor aleinu kachol hamonam. Shalo asanu ki goyei haratzot, that God did not make us like the goyei haratzot, the Gentiles of the lands. And I had a wonderful congregant in Chicago, real right-wing guy on Israel, and every time we said Aleinu, he would look at me and make sure I was saying those words, and smiling and woo. And, those are exclusive, powerful words that do give you a sense of ownership. This is our responsibility. Aleinu, this is who we are and no one else. So Rav Zalman, in this incredible genius, says that Shelo Asanu, Shelo, we always read it, the Kri, the Ktiv, and the Kri is the Ktiv is Shin Lamed Aleph, right? Shelo, that not. God did not place us like the other nations. If you read it, Shin Lamed Vav, Shelo Asanu, that means Shelo Asanu ki goyei haratzot, that God made us ki goyei haratzot, just like all the other nations of the world. And it actually works beautifully throughout those three lines of Aleinu. The lo samanu k'mishpachot hadama. God placed us like mishpachot hadama. We're all God's people. We're all in this world. We all have responsibilities for this world. The Torah believes that everyone does. So don't tell my right-wing congregant that when I was saying Shelo Asanu Haratzot, But part of my kavana was to this other way of reading it. And I think that it's legitimate to say in Hebrew, and we do this, the Gemara does this all the times with kriyuchtis in the Torah, when something's written and read the same way, but written a little bit different, it could be written differently, that there really are these two forces that we need in Judaism. And one force is the Shalosh, Shin Lamed Aleph, let's say called the force of passion. And there are amazing communities that are passionate about their Judaism, that are doing Judaism night and day, that are learning night and day, that are davening all the time, that are worrying about how they're supposed to dress. Now, there are problems with this also, but they're doing Judaism all the time. There are these passionate communities. And then you have the balance of Shalosh, Shin Lamed Vav, to open up to the world and realize that Judaism is not supposed to be just an inward looking, how can I make myself passionate, a passionate Jew, but it's supposed to be, how do I figure out, first of all, how to open up this door to other Jews, and second of all, how to make sure that my Judaism is impacting the world. And certainly, thank God for movements and Tikkun Olam movement and other denominations of Judaism, really environmental Judaism, really opening up, and that shalom, that realizing we're like all the other nations. And I think that that's sort of where Judaism really has to find the balance. And passionate Judaism, we have to make sure that we are passionate, that we're proud of our Judaism, that we promote a culture where Jews feel a sense of ownership. And at the same time, we have to make sure that this is a Judaism that is inclusive, that goes out, that reaches out, that connects. I studied, I mean, it's beautiful, people have been engaged in beautiful types of religion, but I did study the Islamic fundamentalism. That was sort of my foray into the other. And the truth is, and as Rav Shai said, there are some interesting similarities in fundamentalism in other religions and in the passion that we feel in our religion and see. But the critical thing is that we have all the advantage in the Jewish community with Jews, that there is this sense of mishpachtology, of ownership, of sense of commandedness, that we're commanded by who we are as Jews, and even if someone forgets it, tinok shenishba, someone who didn't know about their Judaism and suddenly discovers through birthright or something that, yes, I'm connected, we have all the advantages. The question is, as Rabbi Danya said, are we going to open up that store of Judaism? Are we going to let people know that they are full owners as much as we are in our Judaism? And are we going to allow that inclusive Judaism to be passionate, to be strong, to be proud? And if we can get that balance right, then I think then we can really balance a Judaism that is open and learning from the world and also very secure and proud of who it is.
I think that we've kind of danced around an issue, and that is that after we finish basking in the poetry of pluralism, religious pluralism and multiculturalism, we're faced as Jews with a very serious issue. And the issue is that the demographics living as a minority in the United States are stacked against us. And what does it bode for Jewish survival as a minority if we just say we're part of this marketplace and we can't identify anything specific within Judaism that Judaism has to contribute to individual human life and to general human culture? I think if we can't identify something there, then Jewish survival is in great, great peril, because the options are so vast and are so compelling that there's no reason in the world why the majority of future Jews who are born Jews will remain Jews. So if you could perhaps address that. So I'll ask each of the panelists, I'll give you 2 minutes to perhaps respond to some of the statements that were made by your fellow panelists. Rabbi Danya.
I was 13 years old when I decided I was an atheist because I saw all the people standing up and sitting down and standing up and sitting down at Rosh Hashanah, and nobody knew what they were doing. Nobody knew why they were doing it, and the words in the Machzor were certainly not going to give me any information about why this was a valuable or relevant thing to my life. So my question is, what are we doing in synagogues for our kids, and then what do we have to offer for high school students, college students, adults who have never, ever, ever, at least even seen the outline of the door to know that it opens, to know that there are the shiny, magical things that can profoundly impact who they are, that can not only fill up their souls and give them wonderful things that make their lives deep and meaningful, but transform them in ways that they can be of service to others and fulfill their ultimate purpose in the world. If you have no idea that any of this is there, of course you're going to engage in the secular world. I engage in the secular world, and I had to fight to find a way to make sure that the treasures and my 21st century values as a feminist, as an engaged person in this other conversation, were able to build bridges. But I don't think we've done a good job with our children. I think we're still in formation in figuring out how to communicate that to our adults.
It's absolutely imperative that we cross-train spiritually. It's hubris to imagine that any one tradition that, with all of its beauty, could completely fulfill the mandate for human flourishing. It's impossible. God is too big to fit into one religion. And Judaism, with all of its beauty and all of the wonderful things that we could speak about, it's Tselem Elohim if you're Yitz Greenberg, or if you're a Zoharist, you want to talk about the Zohar, and all of its variegated, exquisite beauty. It can't be expected, it shouldn't be expected, to completely fill out a curricula for what it is to be a fully evolved human being or human society. It's not possible. And it would be hubris for us to demand it of it. It requires humility for us to admit that there are benefits that have been gleaned and have been borrowed from other traditions already. This is not a new conversation, whether it's a Zohar in the 13th century in Spain borrowing elements of the cult of Mary and incorporating it into Judaism, or Sufis of Avraham ben Arambam, Abraham the son of Maimonides. We have always done the best to both neutralize elements that were not part of the Jewish tradition and also include them in a way that was transformative and transmuting. So that's important just for us to understand in terms of the next evolution of Judaism, the next software upgrade to our software. Judaism 7.0 will include, already is including, things from other traditions. That is already the fact. In the beginning, when meditation first showed up on the scene in the Jewish world, Aryeh Kaplan wrote a book that was all the rage. And before you knew it, everybody was saying, it's treif, it's not kosher. And then when they saw that everybody in the marketplace was buying it, they said, how can we bring meditation into our synagogues? Right? So the first moment is resistance, and then the second moment is accommodation, and the third moment is appropriation. Not only is meditation something that we do, but we began the meditation. We Jews discovered meditation. It's ours. Abraham sent people to the east, and the gifts of Judaism were the original gifts. I mean, you find that literature in the literature, that the meditation gifts of Buddhism and Hinduism are actually part of Abraham's faith, that Abraham is connected to the caste system in Hinduism and so on. The Brahmans are Abrahams and so on. All of this ridiculousness, it's there. So why not admit it?
I really feel about that.
I really feel. So it's important for us to proactively and positively engage these traditions and glean from them what we need for our own spiritual nourishment. That's one. Two, that Bruce Feiler once wrote an article in the New York Times where he quoted this notion that even if the more you know about your family's history, the better psychologically it is for you, right? The more is hidden from you, the worse it is. And so even adopted children who are coming to a narrative that isn't even their own, have shown, psychologically, studies have shown that they are better adapted to the world. And so there's something about this notion of mishpachtology that, to answer you, Eugene, there are beautiful, unique things about Judaism, but the most important thing is that it belongs to us, it is our story, right? Again, conversations about conversion is another, but it is our story, it's my story. Someone is sitting with me and I'm saying to them, listen, Judaism has a unique way of approaching interpersonal relationships. And they say, well, there's tzedakah, well, there's also sila, there's also these elements in other traditions. We are not the ones that own tzedakah, but it is our story. Now, again, back to Shai's point about transcendent God versus Buddhism, which is non-theistic, I would take issue with this one point. The Zohar in the 13th century is not responding to a non-dual renewal of Zeitlin in the end of the 19th century. There are elements that are part of our larger theological landscape that we're beginning to focus on. not because of the non-dual push in the 19th century, but because Buddhism is responding to a number of factors in the landscape of America, and in particular, and in the world in general. And when people go back to the Zohar or to Kabbalah, it's in order to say, we have it there so we don't have to keep looking for it in other places. We want what Buddhism is pointing towards, which is self-development and not identity. Jewish identity isn't the only reason to be Jewish, or the Holocaust isn't the only reason to be Jewish, or because my parents told me to do so, or because of commandedness. It's not sufficient in our society. There has to be the question of, how does this actually work? Because you can grow up, as I did, in the Orthodox world or the ultra-Orthodox world, and you see, Pukhazi, my Amadavar, what's going on, what's actually working in your Judaism? How does it actually make you into a more centered, more loving, more compassionate human being? And the answers to that are often found in the mystical elements of the tradition.
I want to say just a couple of really strung together things. First of all, in response to Eugene's question, which will strike a different chord than either of my two friends here. One of the reasons I think it's important to me to raise my son engaged in Judaism is that I believe the Jewish people have an eternal covenant with God who reveals Torah to us. Right? That said, I'm also aware that is, if ever there was a non-starter with someone who's not inside that language, that is it, right? Imagine, with all, so, now, but I think it's very important to be clear about what you believe versus, because that's actually too oppositional, what you believe in relation to what it makes sense to say to people, what an invitation looks like. And, sort of maybe second and derivative point about this, ultimately, the bolstering or resuscitation, we might say, of Jewish life in America will not come, I think, from competitive claims, but from the reintroduction of compelling ones, right? The fact is, most Jews do not walk away from Judaism because they're not convinced that Judaism is more true than Christianity. They walk away from Judaism because it's deadly, right? And I think it's important for us to face up to that reality. I mean, the answer is the American synagogue and the American day school and all of that. And that requires a massive collective process of tshuva, which if I had an hour, I would be happy to rant and rave about for a long time until I fell off my soapbox. Yeah, I wish I could say something about what David said. I'll only say that I think competing intuitions, which feels to me like what a lot of this comes down to. I mean, one of the things I have thought about a lot is that conversations between believers among different religious traditions and conversations to the extent that either side is interested between believers and non-believers would often be much more fruitful if we could admit that we were actually in the process of taking out and looking at very different intuitions about the world rather than making knockdown, drag-down arguments about, what's the truth and what's not. Right? It requires a tremendous amount of metaphysical humility in all kinds of directions. One last thing I want to say, because I want to make sure this panel doesn't end without someone saying some sentence of this kind, even though I suspect we would all have different language of saying something similar. I personally am very wary about the language of things like personal enrichment and things like that, because even though I believe in those things and think they're really important, it's very important to me that Jewish teachers say over and over again without apology that what it means to be on a spiritual path or what it means to enter a religion, right, is not primarily about asking what that religion can do for you, but about how that religion can reorient you so that your life is oriented around service and around giving and about generosity of spirit and around kindness. And I think that is so fundamental that I get very nervous about the ways, even in a lot of popular Jewish culture now, people have begun to invoke this very almost technological language, right? Some people that I know and like very much who talk about American Jews should be encouraged to hire Judaism to do something for them. No. American Jews should be invited to encounter Judaism as one of the things that is possible in the world that teaches you not everything is for hire, right? And in a similar way, right? The question is not how can Judaism serve you. The question is, can Judaism be expressed, articulated, offered as a path that teaches you that the much more fundamental question, on some level the most fundamental religious question there is to teach us again to ask, how can I serve? So we ought to be careful when we introduce language to invite Jews into Judaism that the language we use doesn't mean that we simply become more like the culture that spiritual paths are intended to be an alternative to. That is a very real and very grave danger.
What everyone has said has resonated, but I would, to address Eugene's question about survivability and all that, I do think that we have to look to a sense of discipline. Touches a little bit on what Shai said. Rav Soloveitchik talked about discipline as a critical foundation of Judaism and Jewish life. And I think many people think discipline is about red lines and boundaries and saying no. So I'd like to look for a positive discipline. And I think that that is making the critical parts of Judaism strong and meaningful in your life. Kashrut. You know, the basics of Judaism, kashrut, Shabbat, mikvah, taharat mishpacha, the purity of the family. And I'm saying whatever way you want to interpret these things and integrate them in your life. And we can argue about them and argue about what is Shabbostic, what is in the spirit of Shabbat, what is not. We can argue about technology in Shabbat, but Shabbat has got to be, I think these are the markers that in America, in a very loose society, these are the things that can save us. I have a very dear Christian friend who, when she started working as a lawyer in New York, said, I want to, Sundays, I want to keep special. I want to go to church. I do not want to work on Sundays. And it was really nearly impossible for her to do this because our environment, our culture, and our economy, everything presses on us. We have these gifts as a Jewish people that we have a Shabbat where we can say, I cannot do this. Kashrut. Let's say your interpretation of kashrut is more on the area of environmentalism and caring for animals and caring for the workers who produce the food. And unfortunately, the efforts that we've had, the initial efforts have been, varied. Magen Tzedek, I wish it would be more successful. And yet there are voices out there that combine traditional understandings of kashrut with these other understandings. But make sure that that is critical in your life and that you're just not going to eat in every restaurant. We got to find that passion again and that discipline and make sure that we're making sure it's part of our lives. And that will keep us, I think, sane in the society we live in.
I was very moved by the image of helping people to find the door to show them that there's a room filled with treasures. It feels to me that maybe part of the problem, and it's the pre-step and it's the challenge that we face, and I'm not sure how the four of you deal with this, is that store is filled with treasures only if you're in search of something and feel that there's something lacking. And are we prepared for someone to look in the store once you open the door and say, it's really very exciting, but thanks, I can shut it and walk away?
I do believe that if we want to have faith in the people that we're engaging, and most of my rabbinate thus far has been working with the people who didn't go to day school, who didn't love their youth group, who aren't just going to show up to stuff. And that is very, very often the people that I'm talking to. We need to trust them, and we need to trust their intelligence and their wisdom, and to let that conversation that happens in the room be one in which we're not just talking, but we're asking questions. What do you need? What do you want? What are your yearnings? What are your questions? And yes, to take seriously the fact that there may not be, at this particular cultural moment, a one-size-fits-all answer to that question, and a one-size-fits-all treasure package, if we're just going to beat this metaphor into the ground. Why not? And yes, so I enter my conversations with the understanding that somebody might say no thank you, and that's part of me taking them seriously as a thoughtful adult. And in my experience, when you take someone seriously, they are more likely to take you seriously. When you talk down to them, when you condescend, when you say, oh, if only you understood, then that's when they walk out. And if you say, I'm listening, they are more likely to trust you and to listen as well. And so there can, that's the beginning of a covenantal relationship on the human level that can then open the space for another kind of a covenantal relationship to emerge.
First of all, I just want to thank each of you so much for your presentation. I'm the beneficiary of over 17 years now of Jewish education, and I've spent so much time learning that my Judaism and this gift that I've been given needs to be defensive, and so much time learning how to protect the wrapping paper around this gift that I haven't had any time to really celebrate it. So the fact that all of you are on a panel, first of all, together is incredible, and second of all, that none of you have been defensive and that you've all been celebrating the gift that you've been given is so incredibly inspirational to me. So
we've gotten to the end of the panel, and you failed in surfacing differences. So I want to ask a question about differences. You're all open-minded to other traditions, otherwise you probably wouldn't be sitting up there. But you all work in different traditions and different institutional settings. And what I wanted to ask was, to each of you, if there's time, what would be a hard decision for you in your institution about the limits of inclusion? Not an easy question. If the Ku Klux Klan came, you wouldn't allow them. But what would be a hard decision in which somebody would come to you and say, can we introduce this into the tefillah or into our institution? And you would say, that's a hard question, and no, actually, this is the limit of my inclusiveness.
I want to say how interesting it is to be on a panel where there was a caricature that Shai, of course I know he said it jokingly, but would the Federation ever fund a Jubu festival of sorts? And I thought, it's very interesting because here we are, we start talking about spirituality, and it essentially became a conversation in the very language that is a very comfortable language for the normative Jewish world, about covenant and what is unique about Judaism. And essentially, the very conversation itself, which began as a kind of third-person observation about it's so interesting that we're having this conversation about Buddhism and about spirituality in general. We would have had it 100 years ago when we had this conversation. There still is no institutional setting to actually address the thousands of Jews who are actually seeking in spiritualities that are not rooted in this language. We have the Kabbalah Center, we have other places where Institute for Jewish Spirituality, but for the most part, funding in the Jewish world goes towards bringing people in the door to places like Machal Hadar, which is wonderful, and I think that's amazing. But there isn't anywhere that is specifically gearing itself towards someone who would become a Baha'i, or someone who is interested in Buddhism. There are literally 300,000 to maybe 5,000 Jews involved, estimated, in the Buddhist world in America. So I'll just say, for me personally, my institution, which is, New York City, it's kind of a bit different, but also normative in its own way, where we would draw the line, just to answer your question so we can move on to others to hear what they would say. Where I would draw the line is, I would draw the line with specific religious practices that are designated as such. Like we wouldn't pray, if somebody came and said, we want to do, I have a woman in our community who's a minister, and she's married to a Jew, and they're raising the kids Jewish, so they go to Heschel. And she's been having a conversation with me about having a kind of perennial practice of communion. Would we ever do something where, would there be people where we would you be that bold in practicing communion? So for me, it's off the table. No, it's like completely off the table. But if somebody said to me, would you sit zazen or do you do yoga in a place like Rome? We'll say, of course. And again, it's very nuanced to have a conversation about that. But I think more to your point, would we include praying to the feminine, which is a very mystical idea within Judaism? Would we include the feminine aspect of God? Of course, people are saying, oh my God, that's crazy, how could you do that? But it's in the sources, right? It's in the sources. There were people, we talk about God language being inclusive, but we never talk about God as a woman. And it's in our tradition, it's right there in the sources, and we could ground it in that. So I would be completely open. We do use feminine God language at times in Romumu, and I kind of wonder if other people would be interested in doing feminine God language in their shuls.
So, just one sentence about a journey that I have gone on over the course of my life. When I was younger, and I first started studying Christianity intensively, which is a process that has been going on now for 25 years, it was very important to me to pray with Christians. And so I used to regularly go to, Christian services at Harvard and all this kind of stuff that I would do. And then I reached a point where I realized that for me, as someone who's philosophically inclined, there was a very important distinction between saying, all religions are the same on the one hand, and saying that all religions have something crucial to teach on the other hand. And the more seriously I came to take the theological claims of Christianity, the more I realized it no longer made sense for me to pray with Christians. Because Christians who traditionally believe in an eternally begotten Son, when you talk about the Father, you are always already talking about Jesus Christ. And it simply made no theological sense to me anymore for us to together sit in a room and invoke God. It didn't make any sense. It was predicated on living in a time when no one took theology seriously. And I have tremendous misgivings about that, because many of the people who won't do that, I want no association with. I'm actually not doing it out of a profound respect for Christianity and wanting the integrity of both Judaism and Christianity to be upheld even as we talk to each other. That's a very messy ground, and frankly, it's a very lonely ground. But that's a place where I would say no, even though many of my students simply have no understanding of why I would say that.
I want to give a straightforward answer, but in several levels. First of all, halacha. And I sort of mentioned regarding Shabbat Kashrut, but halacha helps us. We follow halacha. We feel bound by halacha. Surprisingly, halacha is very flexible many times. I've attended a wedding in a church by Ask Rav Aaron Soloveitchik. I couldn't stand in the sanctuary, but I stood right outside and viewed my very close friends getting married. So halacha, first of all, is what our first point of reference. But then also, there are things that hashkafa, philosophy, the whole issue, we don't admit women to Yeshivat Cholevei Torah. That's not really a halachic issue, but it is about the communal standards, and that's something that we watch very closely, and something that I think is very real. And countering all this is this important value of inclusivity and being together. So we do have Tuesday night learning with Hadar and Maharaj, women and men, and we do have certain programs. So we have that balance, but we follow halacha, we use communal standards as a guide, and then the other thing is really to send out, to send our students out when they graduate everywhere, and make sure that they're Orthodox rabbis, as Rav Avi Weiss says, Orthodox rabbis for the entire world and for the entire Jewish world. And just one other thing I want to say, that on top of all this is this concept of, Rav Avi Weiss coined this term open orthodoxy, and originally, even at Limmud, so many years ago, he mentioned it's about that anything can be discussed. So yes, you have halacha, we daven, how we do kashrut and all that, you have communal standards, but as far as the conversations in the rabbinical school, it's a critical foundational principle that everything can be discussed, anything can be on the table, non-judgmentalism, and then it's argued and discussed. It remains on a theoretical level, but you have to have a place where you can talk about everything, and then halacha, and then communal standards.
Thank you all for being here.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support Shalom TV with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double chai or more, to the nonprofit organization Jewish Education in Media. Simply visit the Shalom TV website homepage and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check made out to GEM, Post Office Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive on DVD with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.